Welcome, everybody. I am your host, Francesca Warren, and I am here today with Do the Work, our weekly series where we talk to real educators, real practitioners about all things education. Now, you guys know when you get here, introduce yourself. Don't come in, don't be rude. Today, we have Dr. Jonathan E. Collins, and he's going to talk about parent and community engagement in education reform. So, before we get started, Dr. Collins, tell us all about yourself, your research. We're so excited.
Well, Francesca, thank you for the invitation and for having me to be a part of this conversation with you. I've been really looking forward to it, and I hope the listeners you find something valuable from the dialogue that we'll have together. And so as just mentioned, I'm Jonathan Collins. I'm an assistant professor here at Teachers College, Columbia University. I focus on political science and education. So my academic background is in political science. I have a PhD in political science from UCLA. Shout out to the West Coast. And but I basically use political science approaches to study education, politics, and policy, and how school governance works. And so for me, I've been really fascinated with the puzzle of what's happening at the system level. If you look at a lot of the research on education, a lot of it focuses on how we can get better teaching and instruction, and that's key, and we should continue to do that. But I think if you look at a lot of the problems that we've been having with educational inequality, it seems to be more of a system level problem. It's not just how do we get quality instruction in classrooms. The real question is like, how do we get it at scale and how do we get it equitably? How do we ensure that the kid in the Bronx gets the same quality of education as the kid, at least in the New York context, on the Upper East Side? How does the poorest kid get the same quality of education as the richest kid? And particularly, how do Black and brown kids who enter the system from being historically marginalized, suddenly get a quality education that is going to be not just useful but really emancipatory, right? And for me, that's a system level question, right? How do we design a system that is equipped to do that?
You just said a mouthful. Like, we're about to have fun today. Um, Can you talk about, and thank you for this. And guys, we found Dr. Collins. Every year we do our top 50 educators, and we have closed the submissions for this year for 2026. And so we're reviewing, we have a committee that's reviewing. And somebody, you don't know this, Dr. Collins, I didn't share this with you. But we were going through just applications, and somebody sent me some of your research. I got to remember which one it was. And they were like, hey, this young brother is doing great work, think about him. And so we took it to the committee and they were like, we like him. And so that's how you got on the top 50 list. Because sometimes it's about who somebody has read something, somebody wants to share something, and it's easy to get lost in content or research, I'm sorry. And so you don't know you don't know who you don't know. So when you talk about looking at education from a political science lens, that might not be the exact words that you use, but that's kind of what you alluded to. Talk to us about what that means, because that I'm curious about that.
So in political science, we mainly study how people respond to political systems. So we study what we call political behavior. So that's what factors will motivate you to vote in an election, what factors shape how you think about certain policy issues or how you form a quote unquote political opinion. So that's one sort of area of research. And then the other is more institutions focused. So we study, what makes an institution democratic? How do you get deeper democratic institutions? What are the sort of barriers between democracy and authoritarianism? And so I take this kind of institutions approach of like, well, what actually makes an institution democratic? How do we sort of think about it from a conceptual standpoint? And then how do we measure it empirically? And I apply it really to school boards and school districts. And so for me, it's interesting in the education landscape because we treat this idea of our school districts as mini democracies. We treat that as settled, as if like, yeah, it's true. But if you actually look at how they function, there's increasingly more concern that our school system is very undemocratic. So I'll ask you, Francesca, what do you think is the typical voter turnout rate in a school board election?
So it's interesting you said that because I serve on a school board and I know.
Ah!
See, let me tell you something, Dr. Collins, we're going to have a good time. I would say less than 10%. I would say
Yeah.
less than 10%. And I'm saying that, and I think I'm being generous. Am I right or wrong?
You're right. It's about 10%. We don't even, the thing is, we don't even have an accurate measure of this, right? Because there's so much variation in how these elections are structured. So every school board has a different electoral system depending on the state that it's in, and really its relationship with its county and how they're able to set up their electoral parameters. So some school boards have elections that align with national elections. Some have elections that are misaligned with national elections. I mean, there are arguments for both, but from the studies that we've seen that have tried to piece together how much voter turnout we get, you're right, we get about 10%. Now, if I told you that there's a system where about 10% of the people are actually deciding who's in power, would you tell me that that system is democratic?
No.
Right. And so that's where we are, though, with school governance and education, in America. And you add to it the fact that the stakes are incredibly high. Right. So it's a system that is not democratic, but then has incredible influence over life opportunity, especially for Black kids. Right. We rely so much on the education system, especially the public education system, to be a gateway to social mobility and opportunity. And so when that system is undemocratic, what does that mean? It means that there are questions about there being an accountability infrastructure. So that means that leaders can do things and things that may not be in the best interest of kids, and there's no public mechanism to hold them accountable for when that goes wrong.
So it's interesting that you talk about this because I definitely agree to that. I agree with all of that, right? And I think and I haven't done research on this. This is just sitting in the seat during COVID. I got on the board 2021, right there when COVID was happening and people were storming school board meetings. Is that I think it took COVID for people to realize how important school boards were.
Oh, absolutely.
I think before that, people have viewed it as, it's just one of those little, it's not an important office. It's not like the mayor or the city council. And I contend that your school board member is more powerful. And I'm not saying that in a way of give me more power, but the decisions that are being made about children, it surpasses almost any traditional office because you're going to feel it immediately. So I love that you talked about, is it democratic? I don't know the mechanism though to get people to understand how important it is, because what we've seen since COVID is Moms for Liberty. They targeted school boards. In my own experience, I think they targeted school boards because nobody was watching. And they realized very quickly that if I can control what kids learn, I can control the masses. I don't know if that's true. That's just how I feel.
No, you're right. I mean, there's a historical precedent for this, right? I mean, you go back to that institution that they don't want us to talk about anymore. Go back to slavery. And what was it about slavery that made it so diabolical? American slavery, American chattel slavery, so diabolical, is that not only was there family separation, but you were prevented from learning how to read. You were deprived of the right of access to literacy and numeracy, right? If we can control what you learn or keep you from learning, then this allows this institution that is reliant on control in order to continue to execute not only exploitation, but the really sort of complete sort of dominance over a subjugated people, right? This started with the denial of education and being very careful about what you can and can't learn. And so you fast forward and Moms for Liberty is leveraging the fact that, if you can control what happens or doesn't happen in the classroom, well, this is this creates a pathway to being able to control an entire people. But then there's also been a more modern history of, look, culture issues are what get people fired up, especially white Americans fired up about the education system. One of the biggest movements that we've had around education really was prayer in schools. You know, you know, even since the sort of the country's um, inception is really not the most accurate term, but since the beginning of the country, the questions of separation in church and state have always been main debates here, right? Like the religious influence over schools has continued to be one of the main sort of like forces of debate and contestation. And so anytime you can bring up something cultural about how people live and what people believe in, and you can inject that into conversations around schools, that's when you get more and more people interested. Before all this culture war stuff was going on, you know, the big debates were more about testing and school choice, charter schools, vouchers. It was more about like how do we solve the inequality problem, and now it's turned into, how do we keep you Black kids from learning about Black history? How do we keep transgender students from having basic rights in the school and in the classroom? It's a complete shift, and you've seen it firsthand sitting in the seat. You're muted.
We're 4 years outside of COVID, and I still don't come off mute right. I'm going to go to the comments. We have Casey. Hey, Casey, she's from Chicago. She talks about we're happy in Chicago to finally have an elected school board. I remember when the mayor was appointing the school board there, my mind was blown. Like, what? Like, people don't have a say who sits on their school board. We have Adriana. I don't think they always listen. My issue with boards I see is they're very seldom have any educators current or retired on them. True point. And, when I sit and think about, that democratic process, I also, one of the things that I've been very intentional about is educating children about what this looks like. Mm-hmm. Children that we are supposed to serve, right? So here's how my decisions impact you. And many times what I have found is that the kids have no clue what a school board member is supposed to do. And I've also seen situations where the school board doesn't look anything like the students they represent. So that's a whole nother caveat, right? I'm sure you have some research about that. So I mean, it's so interesting when you talk about looking at it from a political science lens, because you also talked about systems, right? Because a lot of the research now is about what teachers can do in the classrooms. Right. But when you're talking system wide, how do you change? Talk us through like how you got that systems approach.
Right. And so, I got really interested in school districts as these mini democracies. But then you have the idea of a school district as a mini democracy. And then you have in juxtaposition, a lot of the things that are being mentioned in the comments. You look at school boards, especially in some of the largest districts in the country, and, there are questions about who's sitting in the seat, how representative they are, both like from a descriptive standpoint and really from an interest standpoint. And so, how can these two things exist simultaneously? There seems to be a need for reconciliation here. And so for me, I wanted to know, all right, well, in my work, what would it look like to really democratize a school district? And so I started pulling in a lot of work from democratic theory. So I started reading, Habermas. I started reading Jamie Mansbridge, a lot of these like democratic theorists who are thinking about democracy as rooted in communication, dialogue, and thinking about what we call deliberative democracy. So democracy is legitimized when there's more routine dialogue between, it could be between representatives, but you really want a participatory aspect where it's routine dialogue that's happening between leaders and everyday people, and not just putting everyday people in conversation with leaders, but how do you put everyday people in conversation with each other, and that be the soil through which ideas grow, and we can see accountability towards that. And so it's about democracy that is on the terms of everyday people. What we see right now with school districts, especially thinking about these board meetings and how representation works, but especially the board meetings, when parents aren't engaged or involved or they're not attending, we blame the parents. We say they're apathetic, they don't care, they're disinterested, they're disengaged. But we never really take the step back and say, well, wait a minute, what if the institution isn't really designed for them to participate? Like, what's the incentive? If I'm a parent of two kids, especially I'm a single parent of two kids, I work 2 or 3 jobs, and the only time that you offer the opportunity for us to meet is at 6:00 p.m. and it's in person at the school site at the district office that's all the way across town. How am I disengaged if I'm not going to that meeting? Right? Well, why can't we have a method of participation that's more conducive to how I live my everyday life? Because to me, like, that's what a truly democratic institution does. And so in my work, I look at these different innovations of like, what could we do to just like make the process easier for them to participate? And this isn't rocket science. When you make the process of participation easier, more of us participate. And so what does that look like? One experiment I did was just to see how people would respond to seeing a school board that just responded to public comment, right? And so this isn't a huge radical shift in how a school board runs their board meeting. I just found this one district that decided, after public comment, we're going to have another item on the agenda where it's just response to public comment. And it's not one-on-one response, so they're not responding directly to people. They're just responding to the general themes, because you start to do one-to-one response, as you know, Francesca, you could get yourself in some legal liability issues. So you don't want to do that. But you can't just have people come all the way to the meeting, stand up for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, pour their hearts out, and then just say to those people, thank you for your comment. Have them go sit down and think that, this was a democratic process. And so what I found is that just literally embedding a response into the board, a space for response into the board meeting, increases their trust in the board and increases the likelihood that they'll attend a meeting in the future. And it also changes the dynamic of the kind of public comment that they will deliver to the board when given an opportunity, right? They become more likely to give what I found to be these more solution-oriented comments, which are good for collaborating and bridge building, just by the simple tweak, right? So again, when we talk about system change, it seems like, oh, this is something that's not necessarily directed to what happens in the classroom. Right. But the idea here is that, well, where are we at our best? Are we at our best when these people who haven't been teachers, who don't go to classrooms and go to the schools every day, are making decisions? Or are we at our best when the people who are both either attending schools and or sending their kids to schools every day are putting their ideas on the table? And I think it's the latter.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that, because we have not talked about this beforehand, but I'm a mom of 4, and I am a board member in the system my children go to, right? And I've long said that my last day on the board will be bar an election. I will stop seeking the seat when I no longer have kids in the system, because it's different when your child is in the system, because you want to. I know this probably isn't politically correct, but if you've never had a child in the system, or your children are not currently in the system, and I would even say if you haven't had a child in the system in 4 years, 5 years, things change, especially post-COVID, you don't know the struggles, and it's hard for you to advocate. So I think, as we're talking about this system level changes, and I'm sure that people would challenge it and, say it's not fair and whatnot, but I strongly believe that people who sit on school boards need to have children, foster children, nieces, like somebody they need to have kids in the house, because it's different when you're advocating for somebody who is, all kids are our responsibility, but these are my own personal kids.
Right. And is there clear empirical evidence that having some of these characteristics make you a better leader? No, there's not. But at the same time, how are we going to have boards as leaders of systems better equipped to address the more idiosyncratic needs of kids if those folks don't have a working understanding of those idiosyncratic needs? Right? Because here's the rock and hard place that you're between as a board member. So On the one hand, you are charged with, making policy decisions for the district, and some districts, a lot of districts, you're charged with approving the budget for the district, and you're over the personnel decisions, hiring, firing, teachers, the superintendent, and people from the main sort of bureaucratic staff. So you're charged with doing this on the one hand, but then on the other hand, like, you also have, state regulations that you have to make sure that the district is compliant with, certain kinds of federal standards in place. You have to make sure that the district is compliant with. So, it's easy to get lost in the bureaucratic minutia of the position. And so if you don't have people with that North Star, the kid that's thinking about foster youth because, I got foster kids at home,
Yeah.
I'm a parent of 4, and I know that there are multiple reasons why a kid can fall behind.
Yeah.
Like, I know the importance of a kid having an IEP, and I also know some of the things that can happen when our kids are thrown in special education classes without proper evaluation, assessment, occupational therapy, and more individualized interventions. And so you need that emphasis. You need that lens in order to be effective, and especially, in our communities.
I agree. And I'm glad to see that you're doing this work, because I think for a long time people haven't thought about this. Like, I don't know if it's, I think people have just, let me talk. I think previous to COVID, people have just assumed that everybody who gets on a school board has the best interests of the children.
Right.
And we have found that not to be true. I think.
Well, and, honestly, the more you dig into it, the more, and this from firsthand experience, school board leadership is thankless work.
Yes.
Most school board members are not paid a dime. The few that are receiving like supplemental salaries, so not enough to live on, but just an additional chunk of change just to like give some sort of put something in their pocket in exchange for the amount of work that they do. School board members don't get staff most of the time, so there's no support for you to have people to like sort of sift through policy documents and produce policy recommendations for you to then take into the meetings. You're pretty much a solo. Each board member is kind of a solo act, and so we ask so much of school board members already that, okay, how fair is it to expect them to move mountains when they get in the seat? It's like, well, the only reason it's kind of fair is because it matters that much for individual kids. That if the thing that I always like to emphasize, as much as, school boards can be frustrating, school board politics can be frustrating. Most school board members, they're in this for the love of the game. They're, this is not a job you sign up for until recently for taking over the world and executing some evil plan. You're really doing this because you care. But I think that then we get to the weaknesses of the system, right? The system, as a system, is not structured in a way that makes it, one, easier for school board members to govern more efficiently, and then two, allows them to more easily involve the input of the people who they really need to be in discussion with. Because even before the Moms for Liberty takeover stuff, there were still issues with imbalance at board meetings, where the strongest, the people most likely to attend those board meetings tend to be people who are part of organized groups, special interest groups, if you're a part of a union, or a special advocacy group. And it's the utility of said group depends on their mission, right? Like, there are some social advocacy groups that I really like. There are some that I can't stand, and I would be terrified if they had influence on a system that my kid was a part of. Right? But what I do know is that if you can tap into, again, going back to, the single mom of 3, if you can tap into, the working class family, if you can tap into, the the church minister, if you can tap into folks working at the post office who really want their kids to get a good quality education, but they're busy and they're tired, you can tap into them, then you get a system that is better designed to suit their needs instead of what we have right now, which is a system that's designed to either satisfy the goals of special interest groups, which may or may not align with what kids want, or we have a system that's designed to feed into a lot of relationships that are established sometimes by board members, superintendents, and representatives. You have contracts that districts have with providers that are not really in the interest of kids at all. It's back scratching. And there's millions and millions of dollars being made on the backs of our kids. And I think a part of that is because of the lack of a democratic infrastructure to prevent that kind of thing from happening.
It's interesting. I don't know if you've looked at this case. There was a case a couple of months ago, maybe end of last year. It was in Memphis City Schools, Shelby County Schools in Memphis, Tennessee. Did you see that with Dr. Marie Fagans?
Yeah.
So in another lifetime, I taught in Memphis City Schools.
Really? Yeah, I'm from Jackson.
Huh?
From Jackson, Tennessee, about an hour up the road.
My family's from Jackson. We got to talk offline. We'll talk offline. And I watched it, and I hadn't watched politics in Memphis in a long time. I no longer live in Tennessee, and I watched it, and I was astounded by the number of parents who traditionally, as a teacher in Memphis City Schools, very high poverty, almost, I don't know the numbers, but I'm sure over 85% Black and brown children, impoverished in the city core, and it was very hard for us to get parents to engage in the way we wanted them to engage. They engage, but the way we wanted them to engage. So to see parents actively engaged in the process, telling the school board, we do not want this. And I was floored. I was like, oh, this is what it's about. And so I watched it, and what were your thoughts on that? I mean, I have my thoughts, but what were your thoughts? Did you watch the whole process?
I followed it. To me, I wasn't surprised because it reinforces something that I find in the literature and in my own work. And it's that despite the misconception, there is no evidence that Black people participate in local politics and school politics at lower rates than white people. There's no evidence whatsoever. So I hear this all the time in my classes. There's always going to be students who mentioned that this disparity between Black people and white people when it comes to political participation, or we know that maybe this is happening because low income Black and brown people are less likely to participate. People spit this as if it's fact, and if you look at, and I've been going through to do that. Actually, I have a paper I'm working on about this, where I'm going back and looking at the statistical estimations from all of the papers that I can find written over the last 20 plus years that try to statistically model this. What are the strongest predictors of voting in a school board election or a local election? And I have yet to find a single paper where identifying as Black made you less likely to vote in one of these elections, less likely to be involved politically. There's no evidence to that. There's some evidence that folks of lower income households are less participatory, yes. But if you account for class differences, Black people are just as much, if not more likely to participate. And so what I saw in Memphis, it's a Black city. It was awkward because they were running out of town, a Black woman superintendent, I believe, who, people didn't like the way that she had gone about some things, but then on the other hand, there was some evidence that she'd been quite effective. And Memphis is a district that they've been through a lot. It's a district where they've been playing for years hide and go seek with white folks. I mean, if you want to see one of the most egregious and aggressive episodes of white flight in an American city, of white folks leaving the city specifically to get away from the schools, Memphis, Tennessee is the perfect example there. They had to sue the state to force the construction of the Memphis Shelby County school system because white people were just willing to live as far as they possibly could away from Central City to keep from sending their kids
Yep.
to the Memphis City Schools with Black kids. And so it's a district that's been through a lot.
It has. So, in the city too.
Yes. In the city. And so to see that was, one, inspiring. Although I'm still conflicted about how I feel about the criticisms of the superintendent, but it was empowering to see that level of engagement, but not surprising because, again, like I said, statistically, no evidence. I want to emphasize this because I hear people say this all the time. There is no evidence that Black people do not participate in local politics.
Yeah, and I would even contend that because there's no evidence, and currently we are in the Metro Atlanta area, and I would contend. I have a group that I'm a board member of where it is Parents for Education, right? And it is 99% Black. And those parents are very vocal about what they want and what they expect. So I agree with that. I watched it, and I think the criticism of the superintendent may have been, I don't want to say warranted. It's okay for everyone not to like how the superintendent brings about change. But I've been a teacher in Memphis City Schools before it was Shelby County Schools. I was a legacy teacher. And I can tell you that 17, 18, 19 years ago, some of the same issues are still happening. So if you don't, if Insanity's doing the same thing over and expecting different results, right? So I was okay with the changes she was making. Again, I don't live there. I'm just watching the board meetings, reading, talking to people who are currently there. And what I heard was she was changing the status quo. And that's where she went wrong. So
yeah. I mean, and ironically, in regard to this conversation, I think, one of the things that she was accused of was skirting the open meeting laws to do it. That she was doing a lot of things in dark. That she wasn't, allowing them to go through the democratic process where there's transparency, where you talk about these things in public meetings. You give the Memphis community the opportunity to address their concerns via public comment, and you have policy in different committee meetings happening where people can attend, learn more about these issues as they develop before they're brought to the board. And so, I think it's the Washington Post that their signature tagline is "Democracy dies in dark," and that's kind of the issue with what seemed to potentially have happened in Memphis with Superintendent Fagans. But it just goes to show you, this is the thing that I think a lot of superintendents get wrong, which is that you can have great ideas for reform, and I understand why you feel like you need to move expeditiously with those reforms because, as you know, Francesca, the average tenure of a superintendent is 3 years.
Yes,
3 years. And so I always tell my students, one of the things I love to do in class, like my students, how much would I have to pay you to be a superintendent? What's your number? What's your salary number? Right? And they get freaked out by this question. They're just like, and they feel like I'm here for good in the kids. So 60,000, 70,000. I was like, I'm telling you, there's a job where you're likely to be fired in 3 years. So you're gonna be looking for a new job in 3 years, right? And you could be fired because of something that doesn't even have anything to do with what you did on the job. Because you're responsible, right? And so, given that, you couldn't pay me enough to take on that. Like, I have the utmost respect for people who take on that superintendency job. Yeah. And again, because of that quick turnover, there is this felt need to execute a reform agenda quickly. Like, I got to do it fast. I want to change test scores, reading, math. I got to do it quick. Yeah. The issue is that they tend to want to do this and sidestep the community. And we've seen it time and time again. Even these reforms that are evidence-based, that are tried and true, that are actually good ideas.
Yeah.
They fail because they're not implemented correctly. There's no community buy-in, right? And sometimes, especially when you're implementing a new reform, it requires you to take a couple steps back before you take steps forward. Yeah. And all you know as a parent is there's a new person in the seat, and suddenly I see my kid taking a step back.
Mm-hmm.
And now from all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
And so, that's the tension there. And that's why, again, having a strong democratic system where you can move these big ideas forward, but it needs to be inclusive of the people who have the most at stake here. The people that are sending their kids to school every single day, getting up at 6 a.m., putting their kid on that bus, and telling their kid, you better not act up at school. Right? Blaming everybody but the school board. Right? They're trusting this system to care for and educate their children. Right? The least that they could do is be given some say in the process.
I love that. And this kind of caveats into our, this is the first not real question, but this is the first question on my list because we've been talking for 38 minutes, but it was so good. How can, when we talk about community-driven engagement, right? Approaches, what does that look like?
So it looks like a number of different strategies. Like I said, a very simple one is the domino effect that can happen from embedding response to public comment. I've looked at that. One of the initiatives that I've studied, I have a couple of studies where I've looked at this concept called participatory budgeting. I love participatory budgeting. I try to get people to implement it in districts as much as I can. So what we do with participatory budgeting is you take just a subset of the budget. I do this in schools too. I do this with kids in schools. But as a district, you take a subset of the budget and then you use it, you put it up as essentially discretionary. And what happens is around that small sort of discretionary budget, you allow for this process where you select delegates from all across the community, people who are really representative of the community, not the loudest voices, not the folks who are the friends and the political donors or the political supporters. You really get people who are embedded in all the different parts of your district in the communities. Let them serve as delegates who come together and then they meet, go back into their communities, essentially survey their communities to figure out, okay, how should we spend this discretionary funding that the district is giving us? They take those ideas, come together, and then over a series of weeks, they turn those ideas into clear, concrete proposals. Right? The district brings in issue experts who can tell them, okay, you can't spend this on facilities because of why. You can't spend this on smart boards because smart boards are a bad investment now. So you want to do something in the classroom, it needs to be around these parameters. But they put together these very clear proposals, and then they have a voting day. And people from all across the community, they come and they vote on the proposals that they want to see implemented. The proposals that get the most votes, those actually get funded by the district, and it becomes this sort of celebratory thing. And so what I find in the participatory budgeting studies is that people who are exposed to this process, it deepens trust in your district. So the participatory budgeting itself started in the late 1980s in Brazil when they were moving from a military dictatorship into a democracy. And this new democratic regime had to figure out, how do we restore trust in government when everybody thinks that the government is corrupt? And so participatory budgeting became one of those tools. And so we still find evidence of this now. When it's implemented, people begin to develop higher levels of trust in their school district. The ideas that end up getting funded are more aligned with the public opinion and the sort of community preferences when they go through this process. And then especially the people who participate as delegates, we see all these different empowerment effects. So one, they begin to see themselves as more efficacious, as more powerful, and as more influential. and therefore become more likely. Again, these everyday folks, now they've suddenly become more likely to attend meetings. They'll reach out to school board members if there's something that they want to say or something that they want to address. And then they also develop a flatter view of the power structure. So they're less likely to see wealthy people in the community as the most powerful. They really start to see that, like, oh, this idea of people power is possible. So I love participatory budgeting as a very practical, clear, and effective innovation that happens. It just doesn't happen, I think, enough in Black communities. It's happening all over the world, but it's even happening some in the U.S. But like Arizona, parts of New York, parts of Chicago, parts of California. Yep. Chicago with the local school councils. It's similar. But it has there's some democratic innovation there. It's different, but I would love to talk about the LLCs if we have some time. But yeah, like I'd love to see this happening more in our communities because I think it's particularly impactful there.
Absolutely. And in our district, we have a version of this. In other districts, whether they're called school governance or local school council, but I still say, how do you get the parents to be a part of it, right? So you still got to have, when I say right, I mean, you still have to have a representative sample.
Right.
You can't be the loudest parent. That doesn't mean that it's democratic. The loudest parent being on the local school council. When you're talking about this, we're after COVID, and I got to ask this question. Have you found a difference in your research about parent involvement, parent engagement, community engagement post-COVID?
I have not found significant differences. So the big question that I get about engagement pre-post-COVID is, are we seeing the polarization? So pre-COVID, again, the politics of education was more about the different ideological approaches to solving the inequality problem. I miss those days, right? Like even the people I disagree with politically, we all understood that we were all advocating for approaches to give Black kids, Latinx kids, poor kids a better opportunity at mobility. Right now, some people may think that needs to be achieved through charter schools or private school vouchers, or dismantling the public school system entirely. Some people believe that it's actually through strengthening the public school system, adding more wraparound services, adding more supports for kids, individualized needs. But we agreed on the problem. It was inequality. And you fast forward now, and we don't agree on the problem anymore. I think there's those of us who are still here focused on the inequality problem and saying, hey, especially post-COVID, that inequality problem has gotten worse. And so we really need to be talking about this. Socioeconomic mobility, it's getting worse. The gap between the wealthy and the poor is expanding. The ability for the school system to really support poor kids it's shrinking. We really need to be talking about this. And then there's these people that are talking about transgender kids and bathrooms, and they're talking about the diabolical threat of Black history texts and Toni Morrison books to the psyche of kids, making them feel uncomfortable because of their race. And so with this political backdrop, you would think that you would find more evidence that parents are more polarized, and especially the parents who are participating at board meetings and who are following politics education politics more closely. I don't find any of that. I find that I don't find much evidence that the more active parents are any more politically polarized than they were, pre-COVID. It's just the media. You get a lot of media coverage around the more polarizing episodes, and I found this too. This is another study. We're going to put up a report about this on our website soon, from a media study, a media content study, where we tracked media study, media stories on school boards for over a year straight. Just every day, we scraped everything that we could find about what the major stories on school boards were, and we found that a large share were these political controversy, culture war issues. So it's overrepresented in the media. And as a result, it gives this perception that parents are incredibly polarized and torn apart by all the culture war stuff. But if you look at the data, it's still parents who really care about their school being able to just deliver a quality education for their kids. They still care about, like, is my kid, in a place where they're safe, where they can learn? Are we investing enough in our schools? And are our schools becoming, are our schools still pipelines to higher education? Is my kid still going to be able to have a shot at college scholarships, and a successful life? So that's what I've been finding in the surveys that I've been doing.
That's really awesome. And I have a one-off on this. It's when you talk about, like, the need, like, not the need, but people bringing these culture wars and fighting these things, and that's not the word. I don't know what I want to say. I want to basically say the culture wars that we're seeing in schools are a distraction to the real issues, right?
Oh, absolutely.
A book on Toni Morrison, or learning the truth about history, is not going to, or banning the truth about history is not going to stop that IDA is only funded at 10%. Federal, like that's not going to stop that, right? It's not going to stop that. I think Medicaid is the number 2, not expense, but the number 2, and I don't want to say earnings, but school districts utilize Medicaid. It's like the number 2 funding source, right? So if you're talking about federally and Medicaid is being cut, it's not being expanded, it's going to impact children, but people aren't talking about that because they think it doesn't deal with them. So for me, as a former teacher, current parent, school board member, CEO of the Educators Room, these are things that matter to me because I don't care what you read, quite honestly. I want you to read. I think Toni Morrison is an excellent author. I would say even Zora Hurston. But you controlling what a kid reads does not solve the current issues in education.
Well, it's a farce, because it's not even about controlling what kids are reading, because they're banning books from the library. So what they're doing is they're telling you what you don't have the opportunity to read, assuming that you even want to read it.
Right.
If you've been to a school library lately, it's not exactly the club. Like,
right.
It's not cracking in there. Kids are not just like beating down the door to get into the school library so that they can check out the Toni Morrison book. That's not the game. That's not where we at right now.
I think we both. You have a degree in English, right?
I do.
I have a degree in English, and so I would love it if it was the club. I would love it if but it's not. So,
so the idea that banning this book has some powerful impact on how a kid sees him, her, themselves it's ridiculous. It's ludicrous, and like you said, it's a distraction from what we should really be talking about, when it comes to, kids in schools and what's been happening. And the irony of it all is that, okay, so these same people who are banning books in schools and have such an issue with curriculum because curriculum is too woke and it is making kids feel uncomfortable and X, Y, and Z. These were the same kids pre-COVID. I mean, these were the same adults pre-COVID, I'm sorry, that have been on missions to actually remove their kids from the system, right? These are the same parents who wanted more charter schools. They wanted more private school vouchers. They wanted more restrictions on public schools and more private options. They were doing everything that they could to withdraw as many kids as they could from the public school system. So if you're telling me that you actually want to remove yourself from the system, how do you go from that to now wanting complete control of it? It doesn't make sense to me. It's telling me that, like, you know that creating these conversations generates controversy, which generates attention,
Yeah.
which then can be
Creates money.
self-serving politically.
Yep.
But none of it makes sense in terms of making kids' lives better.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting that um we could really take 2 hours for this, and we probably gonna have to bring you back because this is like such good stuff. And guys, he has tons of resources. I'm gonna link his website. He has a plethora of studies and research that he's done, chapter books. So if this is your jam, I have people who are going to be like, this is what I want to talk about. I'm going to put the link so that you guys, and we will shoot it out to our hundreds of thousands of email subscribers also after this. It'll be on our YouTube, so just FYI. I want to know, like,
yes, I'm sorry. That question, Casey, yes. Also, shout out to Casey for having the flyest profile picture. Just
so yes. So I am just, what we're talking about also is a larger system. We talked about the school systems, but let's think about the larger system of who benefits if public schools are removed. Who benefits from impoverished kids not getting an education? Those are some of the questions. It doesn't keep me up at night because I know what the end game is. But for the average citizen, I think now people are, and this is just, I don't know if there's research on it, but my practitioner lens is, this is what I believe to be true, is that this is a far bigger game that the average person doesn't understand, that if I can attack public education, if I can siphon money from it, then I'm not going to educate poor children. I'm not going to educate Black and brown children. I'm not going to educate vulnerable children. And I'm going to be able to keep the socioeconomic class at a system where people can't get ahead. I'm not asking you to feel how I feel, but do you think this is a play in a bigger game around public education?
Well, I think that what's happening is that the behavior is feeding into and therefore helping to reinforce biased ideas about Black people and poor people. Right. And so, one of the things that we've been studying political science for almost 50 years now, I think one of the first papers came out about this, is this concept called racial resentment. And so, racial resentment is this idea that people, especially white people, hold these subconscious biases about Black people that are rooted in ideas that Black people are lazy, that they don't have a strong work ethic, and that the Black people are being handed things that they didn't earn, especially by government, and that Black people are culturally inferior. And so it's not saying that every white person believes this, but what they did is they created a scale. And there's been a lot of survey design work, some that started on college campuses, but now they've been doing national level surveys on this for years that show that, one, there's pretty wide variation in this. So there are, on average, about 40% of white Americans hold a pretty sturdy level of racial resentment. And that racial resentment is the strongest predictor of opposition to the policies that benefit Black people the most. And so whether that's originally one of the first sources of opposition that racial resentment predicted was forced busing. So you're much more likely to oppose busing in schools if you held strong levels of racial resentment. Now you look at whether it's social welfare programs like TANF, you're more likely to oppose the expansion of those programs if you're high in racial resentment. Again, it's important to note, especially the social welfare programs are not explicitly about race. They're not about race. These are just programs that help poor people. But people who think that Black people are lazy and are culturally devoid they're the ones who are opposing these policies that are designed to help poor people, not Black people, poor people, right?
Right.
So again, we've been measuring this concept of racial resentment for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing right now in schools is just the rearing of the racial resentment. Again, the reason why I started studying schools and education, okay, one, of course, I saw the system level gap, but I love the fact that education was a space where if you wanted to actually solve the problems of inequality, this is where you went.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think whether it's when I talk to teachers, we talk to principals, school board members, they are in this, like I said, for the love of the game. They are in this area because they believe we can make a difference here.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing now is people who hold this level of resentment, feeling like, oh, Black people are getting things they don't deserve, like Black history being taught in schools.
Yeah.
Like special programs that promote social emotional learning. Again, things that are not explicitly for Black kids even. We don't want those things because of the perception that they do. And so I think, again, it's rooted in racial resentment. And I think it helps to reinforce it. They target it towards a system so that it can reinforce these biases. Because if I already think that Black people are culturally are culturally inferior and mentally inferior, and then I leave them with a system that is essentially devoid of resources and doesn't serve their interests and doesn't educate them, then the kids that I see who are uneducated, all this does is confirm my bias. And so I think a lot of that is what's happening, is that there's a lot of bias that's going in here that's rooted in these negative ideas of how we as Black people exist. And they target it towards the system to essentially make sure that we see more evidence of the idea that Black people are inferior. So and I think it builds from there, and you can get into social stratification, like you're talking about. You can get into gentrification. You can get into taxing the opportunity grid. But I really think it starts with like folks wanting confirmation of their racist and discriminatory beliefs.
One of the things that, this is such a great conversation, because we've talked a little bit about, the intersection of race, class. We've talked about the intersection of, what people's preconceived notions and what's actually happening. And, it makes me think about, you talk about why you got into education. We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to give you time to talk about anything that we didn't cover. What do you think in the next 10 years, what do you think we're going to see? Because I feel like in education, we go through these moments of maybe, I don't know if chaos is the right word, and then we kind of get back on track and everybody has the same vision, right? Like, we want to do better for children. What do you think that, from the federal level down, what do you think we're going to start to see around parent engagement and those things? And maybe not even 10 years, maybe 5. What do you think is coming to us?
Well, the thing that I fear the most with education is opportunity hoarding. I think we're in the information age where information is the most valuable. And again, I think that's when we're looking at the culture war attacks, we're seeing that. How can we prevent you from having access to information, whether it's with Black history and the ability to know yourself and define yourself in a way that is powerful and rooted in dignity. And even when you think about school choice and school sorting, it's how do you hoard information on what the good schools are, right? Like, you want to get your kid into this school, not that school, right? And you want to make sure that resources are going to your kid's school and maybe not necessarily the other kid's school. And again, this creates that system level problem. I'm not sure if in your district, Francesca, this was an issue, but I see here in New York, I saw it when I was living in LA, that schools now have their own foundations. and they're raising money at the school level. And so if you're a parent and you're able to send your kid to a school where they're raising their own money internally, this puts you in a very different schooling environment than you sending your kid to a school where they don't have that capacity. And it could be same quality of teacher, but now suddenly this teacher with the foundation that's raising all this money, they got twice, 3 times the number of teachers' aides in the classroom as the place without it. And then now they have stuff like coding academies where they're teaching kids to computer code at age 4, and they're exposing them to all kinds of stuff, extracurricular wise, that you're not getting at the place where you can't raise the money. So I worry about the information hoarding. I worry about the social stratification. I worry about your zip code, to Casey's point, being the thing that determines whether or not you get a quality education, that becoming worse and worse and worse. So I think we're gonna see more of that. I also think, though, I'm curious of how the development of technology is also gonna either reinforce this or counteract it. I think there's a lot of optimism around technology, and especially with everything that's happening with AI. I've been doing some tech development stuff myself, actually working on some technological tools to help make parent engagement more efficient and effective and accessible, and incorporating elements of AI. And so I think it can be useful in some ways. But I also, from using AI myself in some ways, to just like get more literate around it, you start to see that it's not like the internet. So, Francesca, with the internet, the internet was good for everybody. It was bad. There are bad things on the internet, but it was something that can make everybody's life easier because everybody needed the information or the ability to connect or do something faster. So the way I like to think about it is the internet made the barber's life easier. Everybody's life was easier a little bit because of the internet. AI is not like that. AI does not make the barber's life easier. AI makes the investment banker's life easier. AI makes the professor's life easier. AI makes the startup developer life easier. It makes people's lives easier at higher levels of the socioeconomic ladder easier. Professions that rely on, or that can benefit from this essentially artificial productivity enhancement. And so I worry about the growing socioeconomic divide that's potentially going to take place because of the expansion of AI, and what that's going to mean for both like how schools are structured, what parent engagement looks like at schools, but then also like what curriculum and design looks like in schools. If we've already had this issue where we already prejudge, we look at a school based on who they serve, and we make assumptions about what those kids should and should be doing. We're going to look at some schools and we're going to assume that, they should be AI schools where we should be teaching them how to use these tools to enhance their productivity. And there are going to be some schools where we look at them and we say, well, these kids have no use for that kind of thing because they're already down a certain path. And, again, all you do is you make the stratification worse. So over the next 5 years, I'm going to be on the lookout for evidence of that, but I'm also going to be looking for folks like you who can be on the front end of doing work to counteract it, right? Making sure that our kids get the same kind of preparation, the same type of exposure to AI, and the same type of productivity enhancement that's going to be happening, especially in the wealthier and whiter schools.
This is so good. I have to ask this. I have 2 questions, and usually only have one, so I have 2. You have such a specific way on how you see education. What kind of school do you envision for your children, future children? I don't know if you have kids, but like, what do you see for like what school would you want to, as a researcher, put your child in?
Well, so I have 2 kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 3-month-old. 4-month-old.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. So the bags under my eyes let you know what's going on here. So the nights have been long, but so I'm this is an active question for me. And so like my 4-year-old, she is in the pre-K program at the neighborhood school in here, and we live in the Harlem area. And I'm happy with that. And I envision just a school where she can learn both, the 3 R's, math, arithmetic, writing, but also be in a place where her identity is affirmed, and where she is around other kids who can help her social emotional development to where she understands that anything's possible. I mean, my job is to raise 2 free Black girls. That's my job. And so I just want schools that allow me to do that. But then also, I see myself as a person, as someone who I have an obligation to also be a part of the school community. So, I want a school that allows me to do that. Like if I have an idea of something that I want to bring to the school that I think will help not only my daughters, but all the kids, I want to be in a school that's receptive to that, where the principal and the school leadership will say, "Oh yeah, like that's a good idea, Mr. Collins. Like we can, we don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of time, and we're kind of strapped for resources. But we'd be interested in the conversation with you to help figure out how to make that work. Or we'd love to talk to you and some other parents about how we can make that kind of thing work." Like that's really what I want. I mean, we put a lot of stock in schools, and we should. But the strongest predictor of how your kid's going to do academically is how you did from an educational standpoint. So parents who have college degrees, this is why parents finish your degree, start that degree program, pursue it. It's not too late. It's never too late, because your kids benefit from it, right? The strongest predictor of how your kid will do in school is the level of education that you attained as a parent. And so I have a PhD. My wife has a PhD. We're very serious about education. We find joy in education. And so our daughters are going to get that at school, but they're definitely going to get it at home. So I worry less about the school from that standpoint. It's really more so about, of course, safety, but is she in a place where she is affirmed and she's given the ability to dream? Because I think with all the test scores and stuff, we've lost sight. We think it's about the proficiency and all that stuff. And yeah, I want my daughters to pass the tests, but like, I want them to feel like, if whatever they want to do, they can do it. They want to be actresses. They want to be ballerinas. They want to be engineers. They want to be, world travelers, whatever they want to be, that they can be it. And the school system is supposed to be, emancipatory. It's not a tool for competition. It's not, I got this grade so that I can do this and therefore be able to compete with other people. It's not about that. It's about this emancipatory experience that opens the aperture for you to understand, okay, I can really do, as cliche as it sounds, anything I put my mind to.
That's a mouthful. And I'm telling you right now, we're going to pull that clip. And we're going to put that clip on social media. As a parent, I've raised a child who is free. I have an older son. He's 25. He's free. And I have other children who people talk to me. And I don't know if this is the educator in me. I think this is the educator in both of us, right? My children can be educated anywhere. They can be educated anywhere. And I think that is a difference sometimes when I'm seeing school parents. I want to go to this school with this test score and this. And I'm like, I don't think that's the golden egg. It's nice. But to me, I want my children to be heard, to be affirmed. I want them to know who they are. And I want them to use school as the vehicle to whatever they're going to do. So that's an offline conversation. Last question for you. The next presidential election, you have been named as the Department of Ed Secretary of Education. What's the first 3 things you're doing in the first 6 months of your term?
Well, so if I were named Secretary of Education, so I would approach it the way I would approach it with my skill set. And so what I see are I think there are we have data gaps. I think that there's a lot of information that we don't know about school systems that we need to know. And so like some of these things that seem maybe not as useful, I would try to get more information on them, like school board voter turnout, representation on school boards, the what we know, what we can find about public meeting policies in districts, and just try to be able to put together some sense of what relationship exists there, right? So are these districts that are more transparent, that listen to their communities, that are more engaged? Do we actually see kids do better in those places? Because we don't know. The American education system is founded under the idea that it does. Like, we kind of assume it. This goes back to John Dewey, Horace Mann. We assume that a more democratic system feeds into a better education system. But because we haven't actually put data to it, that's why there's been all this attack on it. That's why you see these movements to take schools away from public systems, to make schools more privatized, because, well, hey, all we know is we can point to these school districts and say they're bloated with administration. We have failing test scores, and people seem to be unhappy. But there's no comprehensive data infrastructure to let us know whether or not that's true systematically, and what interventions can take place in areas where it's not true. Because this is the thing. I think that there are a lot of school board members, a lot of superintendents, especially pre-COVID, who have been doing really good work, and we never talk about it. We never talk about it. If you're a superintendent and the test scores drop by 3 points, oh, you're going to be on the front page of the news. Or even, but if you're a superintendent and you implement an effective after-school program, or a series of effective after-school programs that maybe they don't raise test scores, but like suddenly kids have something to do after school and they're happy and they're having a good time and they're building strong relationships with each other, that we never talk about that kind of stuff. And so I think, again, creating the data infrastructure for that to happen, I think would be necessary. And then from there, you start to look at policy, different kinds of more policy focused things. Once we can think about creating a better system, what specific policy ideas can we target? Of course, I think we should kind of identify what the literacy expectations need to be for, a 2025, moving forward era. What math and science standards need to be moving forward, and especially in ways that, again, go back to emancipation. How can we give kids education opportunities that give them the tools to do whatever they want? Not just making sure that they check a box, that they're proficient in something, but like really care about what happens after they go through the school system. Like, who do they become? What kind of people do they become? Not just what types of jobs do they enter, what type of sectors, what type of people do they become? And so I would be focused on how we can develop policy reforms that do that, what science education needs to look like to do that, what math education needs to look like to do that, what reading education needs to look like, and to that. And then the last thing that I would do is just really spend some time focused on how do we connect better connect the education system to the workforce, and not just pipelines to work, but like pipelines to where kids are identifying markets that they can fit in based on their interest and their passions, and make sure that we support schools in having programs that facilitate that, but then are integrated into core instruction. So if kids see opportunities in music and dance and theater, how do we have more of those programs and integrate those programs into like core instruction, so it doesn't feel like you do these things on the periphery? They're like, actually, there's intrinsic value in doing that.
To say that we've enjoyed our time is an understatement. We got to bring you back. Guys, I have put Dr. Collins' work right here. Please, 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 please check him out. Dr. Collins, you got to come and write for the educators room. Like, I see you written for some, like, we got to talk about that because these, I like to call them these micro topics are so important. And sometimes, I know you're a researcher and it might take you months and years to formulate your research, but it's also value in the conversation. There's value in conversations like this. There's values in all the things you talked about tonight, and I think sometimes we hear the negative headlines for education and we get bogged down into it. But there are brilliant minds like yourself who are doing great work. So I just want to say kudos. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for being here. Congrats on the new baby and your little baby. And we appreciate you. Any last words? Anything you didn't get to talk about that you're like, hold up, I got to say this?
The only thing I would say is, one, thank you, Francesca, for having me on. Thank you for the invitation. And to any educators out there, I'm proud of you, and you don't get the praise you deserve. You don't get the support that you deserve all the time, but like you are the backbone of our society, right? Like this works because of the work that you do. The most influential people in my life outside of my parents and people in my family have been my teachers. I still remember the names of almost every teacher I've ever had, especially going back to elementary school, because they have that profound of an impact. And I'm not alone in that. Like, we always remember our teachers, the way that our lens through which we view society often gets shaped by those teachers. We go back in time when we talk to our friends from childhood, and who comes up in those conversations. It's always the teachers. So I just hope that you understand that, you don't, one thing that I don't like about our society is that, I get to wear the title of doctor and I get to, have the credential of PhD, and that sends a certain signal that gets respected. And I wish we had some kind of distinction for our K through 12 teachers, because they deserve that too. They deserve to be introduced as a distinguished person, as person who makes an incredible intellectual and practical contribution to our society. And so if anything, just know that educators, y'all are it. Y'all really are.
All right. We love it. Thank you, Dr. Collins. Guys, join us next Wednesday. We have these conversations. Today's Monday. We have them Mondays or Wednesdays. It's fine, either or. But we have these weekly because we think it's so important for us to get in front of people who are doing the work in different ways in education. And hopefully you learn something. Again, please visit Dr. Collins' website, www.jonathancollins.com. Check out his research, send him emails. I'm sorry if I say that, and you might get a lot of emails, but we appreciate this. Thank you, guys.